Hey everyone, welcome to the Water Champions Podcast, a series dedicated to highlighting individuals, businesses, and organizations making significant strides in water reuse and efficiency solutions. Today, my guest is Jonathan Meier, co-founder of Rain Brothers and a notable expert in the field of rainwater harvesting systems, as well as drinking water systems, and a designer of commercial scale solutions. Rain Brothers is a provider of these solutions through their online site at rainbrothers.com. Jonathan, welcome to the podcast. Great to have you here today.
Thank you so much, Paul. My pleasure is all mine. Thank you.
Yeah, well, great. Well, to start, Jonathan, can you share the story behind Rain Brothers and what inspired you to start the company?
Absolutely. I come from a long line of well drillers dating back to my great grandfather, and they actually drilled wells in South Dakota. So cisterns were and are big out there where water is harder to get. And, that water's always been in my blood. It's something that I cherish. And I didn't rekindle that connection until I was in my 20s and I was doing some farming, and we were having a hard time getting access to water at our sites. My inclination was to build catchment structures and small scale rain harvesting systems to collect water for irrigation for our crops. And as I started doing that, we got more and more requests from people to build similar systems, and it transitioned into a business from there.
And how long ago did you start Rain Brothers?
So this is our 19th year in business.
Congratulations.
Thank you so much.
And so who's the other brother in Rain Brothers?
So I actually don't have a brother, but my good friend and I started the company together. It was actually his cousin who said, you should name it Rain Brothers. It's easy to remember. And he's like a brother to me. So he was the co-founder, and he was with the company for about 10 years and then decided he wanted to move on, and still my best friend to this day. So we still keep in close touch, but I am now, my wife is the other brother of
Rain
the
sister.
company at this point. Yeah, that's right.
That's
Rain
great.
spouse. Yes.
Wow, that's wonderful. That's a great story.
Thank you.
Well, let's get into talking a little bit about the rainwater harvesting systems and some of
Absolutely.
the basics and the scales and materials involved. So first of all, can you describe the different types of rainwater harvesting systems that exist?
So rainwater harvesting around here is very essential for anyone who's wanting to build in the rural parts of the region. And then, of course, there's applications for rainwater harvesting in supplying or supplementing irrigation systems. And it's pretty astounding how much water an irrigation system uses. For anyone who's looking to irrigate a lawn, for instance, for every acre of grass that they're watering, if they're doing it by spec, they're going to end up using around 27,000 gallons a week to water that 1 acre of grass.
And 27,000
27,000 gallons a week.
Right.
And of course, some of that is supplemented by rainfall. So that equates to an inch of precipitation covering an acre of turf. So some of that is supplemented by rainfall, but if it isn't, they're using a tremendous amount of water. And, we just had a drought last year. So what do? You're on restrictions from the water department so that you can't water. So you either have to, risk killing your grass or your landscape, or you have to come up with other solutions. So that's really a great introductory route for rainwater harvesting for a lot of folks. And it can be a simple, small scale system. And then you can really scale up from there. And it can be as cost efficient and effective as really your budget allows.
Right. And so let's talk a little bit about the collection. For every inch of rain per 1,000 square feet of rooftop you collect, you get 600 gallons of rainwater.
Exactly right. At least around here, most roofs are around 22,000 to 2,400 square feet on average. So yeah, they're getting 1,200, 1,800 gallons of water every inch of rain that comes off the roof. And here in Ohio, we're getting 3 inches on average per month. So you can really knock out a huge chunk of your water bill if you're looking to irrigate with rainwater.
Sure. And some areas don't get that much rain, in the summer irrigation months. So maybe they're only filling their tanks once or so a year, but sounds like in some areas where you are, you might have the chance to fill those tanks, use them, and refill them multiple times inside of a year.
That's exactly right. Yes, there's huge potential. You even in arid regions, as you say, you can absolutely store more water during that rainy season, get that in reserve, and use it sparingly through the drier months to really effectively manage your household water usage.
How large are these systems typically for a family of four living on 10,000 square feet of land or something like that? And then also how big do they get in some of the larger installations?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, around here, where we do have a pretty consistent average monthly rainfall, we can shrink it down quite a bit. I try really hard not to oversize rain harvesting system for someone. There's a big price increase between a 5,000 gallon system and a 10,000 gallon system. So trying to hit that mark for, let's say, 11 out of 12 months of the year, we can really save money. So for a family of four here in the Ohio region, we're looking at a 5,500 gallon system to supply their household needs, everything in the house at that point. Now, if you're talking about an area like you're in California or Southern California, Texas, even, where there are drier seasons, they're going to want to scale up. So you'll see a lot of rain harvesting installations in Texas, for instance, where they're putting in 30,000 gallon, 40,000 gallon tanks to really collect everything in that wet season and get them through the dry season. So yeah, it does make sense in those cases to scale up. But around here, we really try to keep it as shaved down as possible because there are advantages and disadvantages to scaling up the system. So we really try to weigh all those and really get the perfect size for our customers.
Sure. And then if a customer wants to start, test it out, put in, say, a 3,000 gallon tank and maybe see how that goes the first year in terms of their uses, is there an opportunity where they can expand later on with more
That's a
tanks?
great question. Great question. Yes, most people don't think about that. That's a perfect point. Yes, absolutely. It can be sized up down the road, and it's easy to tie multiple tanks together. Ideally, if you're thinking about expanding the system, you may want to consider subsequent tanks that are the same size and shape as your initial tank. That way, it just is a little cleaner when you're talking about linking tanks together to have them the same size, especially the same height. It makes things easier. But yes, especially above ground systems, they're absolutely easily expandable. You can stick tanks on multiple downspouts even to have some versatility. If you want something smaller in the front yard that's a little easier to conceal, and then in the back, where away from your neighbor's view, you can put something a little larger. That's certainly doable. There are easy ways to tie them together. On the underground side of things, which is really our specialty since we're in an area that's prone to freezing weather, we're burying our tanks and protecting them from frost for year-round applications. In that instance, it is a little harder to expand the system, but certainly doable, especially if you think at the initial installation that there's a possibility of expansion. There's a couple things you can do that will make that expansion much easier so you don't have to dig up against the existing tank and risk damaging that tank.
I remember I was brought in on a job after someone had put in a tank below ground.
Oh,
Turned out
gosh.
it was an above ground tank that they
Oh,
just sunk underground and it floated up when the first rains came. So
oh no.
yeah, that was fun. What's different about you call it a cistern? What's different about a below
Yes.
ground cistern than an above ground tank? Why
Yes.
is that sustainable below ground and what makes it different than the above ground tank?
Yes. Thank you for asking that because a lot of people don't consider that a tank is a tank and they'll just kind of stick the tank wherever. There are key differences. Oddly enough, you can't use an underground tank above ground and you can't use an above ground tank underground. They're just engineered differently. And you brought up a key point. With underground tanks, they tend to be, especially with plastic tanks, they're going to be ribbed to withstand a external force against the tank wall as well as an internal force out from the water supply. The above ground tank, of course, isn't going to have that external force against the tank wall. So they're just going to tend to be more spherical so that they can support the internal push outward from the stored water. So yes, it is a key difference, and absolutely they should not be mixed up as you saw.
Right, right.
Yeah.
And there's a considerable price difference because, as I understand it, the above ground tanks are really made as two pieces welded together, whereas the below ground plastic tanks have a lot of structural rigidity, and the way they're formed is quite complex in the die.
You're absolutely right. The underground tanks are going to be a lot thicker walled. They're going to
Mhm.
have those structural ribs, and they're going to usually have an internal support column so that the tank doesn't begin to fold inward once it's buried. Whereas the above ground tanks don't have that.
Yeah, it's interesting. I've noticed that it's cheaper to get two 5,000 above ground tanks,
Yes.
5,000 gallon, than one 10,000. And that's
Yes,
because of the amount of plastic. They have to make that wall much thicker, which
that's
just
right.
adds to the
Exactly.
cost.
Exactly.
When we think about a rainwater harvesting system, what are the typical components that someone is going to use to create that whole system?
Yeah, so there are several key components that you really want to focus on, and there are gradations of these components based on your end use. So if you're just looking for irrigation water, honestly, you can really strip down the system. Where the water hits first is a pretty important step. A pre-filter or a roof washer is going to be the first point of contact for that rainwater as it comes off the roof, and it's going to try to remove as much sedimentation as possible. A lot of roofs, especially around here, they're going to be asphalt shingle roofs. And a lot of people will say those shouldn't be used for rainwater harvesting. We've serviced 60,000 customers, and 98% of them are using asphalt shingle roofs. It's just the reality. And there's certainly ways to be thoughtful in pre-filtering. But with a good pre-filter, you can remove those asphalt shingle grits that come off, the composite grit. You'll remove leaves, you'll remove debris, and usually you're going to tap out at around 250 micron at the finest pre-filtration level.
Mm-hmm.
There are pre-filters that will go even finer, but those are more for drinking water systems. Whatever's in your budget, a good pre-filter is worth its weight in gold because it'll protect your water quality in the cistern, and it'll save on maintenance, preventing potential cistern cleanings down the road. So you have your pre-filter, then it's going to go into your water storage tank. And as we mentioned, there's several varieties there. From that
How
point,
do we
yeah,
get it into the tank? How does it go
yeah,
from the rooftop or downspout to the tank? What's the usual method?
yeah, absolutely. For an above ground system, you can do something as simple as routing your downspout into the top of the tank, into a pre-filter, and then piping it from the pre-filter into the tank.
That's called a dry system?
Yes, exactly. Yes, that's right.
Yeah.
In warmer climates, you can do what's called a wet line system, which is actually using head pressure as the water hits your roof. It's going to have pressure from the elevation of that gutter. As it falls, it will go down your downspouting. It can go underground, and it can go back up and into the tank as long as the entry point of your tank inlet is lower than your gutter, and as long as that piping from the gutter to the tank is all watertight, solvent welded PVC. So you can do a wet line system, which is a nice way to conceal piping. And then in the underground, we're just going to run that downspout drainage underground through PVC piping, through the pre-filter, and then carry it into the tank.
Great. When you say the underground, you mean a below ground cistern?
Exactly right.
Yeah.
Yes, exactly
Okay.
right.
Great. How about inside the tank? What does it look like?
Once the water enters the tank, here again is a point where we want to be a little more thoughtful in how we're approaching design. You want to try to incorporate something called a calming inlet. And this can be as simple as running that pipe inside the tank all the way to the floor of the tank and bending that pipe back up 180 degrees. And what that does is reduce turbidity or stirring of sediment zones inside the water tank.
That sediment that you talk about, is also called like a biofilm, which is what's at the bottom of a coffee cup or teacup. It's that fine. That's an organic material that actually eats bacteria. So it maybe extends the life of having to go in and clean your tank out by quite a bit.
Yes, there are biofilms, and certainly there are beneficial bacteria, just like in our own bodies, that can eat away at the coliform bacteria. And our goal in a good cistern design is to reduce sediment with a pre-filter and then maintain those sediment zones once the water enters the tank. So we're going to have two primary sediment zones inside that tank. The bottom 6 inches of the tank is going to be all sediment that's heavier than water that sinks. And then the top 6 inches of the water in the tank is also going to be a sediment zone where anything lighter than water is going to float. So ideally, we want to maintain those as much as possible and then draw from that middle zone to really get clear, good quality water. And you're exactly right. If we can do that, if we can maintain those zones by incorporating calming inlets and incorporating good pre-filters, we're really going to have a system that doesn't need a tank cleaning, but every 10 to 20 years. And how we accomplish that, in addition to the calming inlet, we'll put in a pump. And ideally, we're going to ensure that intake on the pump is drawing from above the bottom 6 inches of the tank. There's a couple different ways to do that. Our go-to method is by using a submersible water pump, either with a riser base that's exactly 8 inches that you put in the cistern, and then the intake just stays at 8 inches above the bottom of the pump. Or you can incorporate a floating intake sleeve around that submersible pump that will have a flexible hose and an intake that is suspended about 8 inches below the surface of the water.
And that's the most oxygenated water. If you're pulling it 8 inches below the surface, it's going to be the freshest water you have in there, probably.
Yes, great point. So that's what the inside of the tank is going to look like.
If people have existing irrigation, can they use this rainwater in their irrigation systems, or do they have to pull out something that they've already had on their property for 10 years and invest more money on a brand new irrigation system?
Yes, excellent. So yes, certain regions will have different plumbing codes or different restrictions. So you always want to check with your municipality. And you really, most of the time, don't have to do any retrofitting of your existing irrigation system. You're simply going to put in what's called a pressure tank. And then from that pressure tank, you're going to have a pressurized water supply that you'll tee into your irrigation supply right downstream of that pressure tank.
Great. Couple points I want to make about that. So I love the pressure tank because it has that bladder inside of it. And so what it's doing is it's turning on the pump automatically when typically it gets down to 40 psi in pressure. And the pump comes on, fills it up to 60 psi, and the pump shuts off. And that bladder keeps it pressurized. So if you're running, let's say, a 15-minute irrigation cycle, you're not using your pump. You're using the pressure within the pressure tank to manually provide that pressurized water until it drops to 40 psi. Pump comes on very quickly, fills it to 60 psi, and shuts off. And that's going to be quieter. It's going to reduce energy usage, and it's going to extend the life of the pump, which I think is just a phenomenal way to be more energy conscious and reduce your costs over time.
You're exactly right. It is a very cost-effective and very efficient way of reducing your footprint.
And then you put in a municipal tank top-up valve inside your tank to provide water when you don't have enough rainwater.
Yeah, that's a great point.
It works kind of like a toilet where you have the municipal line coming inside your tank with an arm, and then you have like a fishing line almost and a float. And when the rainwater level drops in the tank, that arm comes down and it opens up the valve for municipal to come in until it fills up a few inches, and then it shuts off. If you're out of water for the rest of the summer and you still need to feed your irrigation, that rainwater or that municipal line in will keep up with the flow of your demand for irrigation, and you'll just be providing municipal until you get more rainwater, but you'll never be out of water whenever your irrigation, for example, runs.
Exactly right. And the nice thing about the supplemental fill valves that are specifically designed for rain harvesting is that they're fully adjustable. So you can choose at what point in the tank level you want that municipal line to start filling. What we like to do is we like to set it so it only fills the bottom section of the tanks, but it's not filling up the tank, so that there's still plenty of room in that rain tank for the next rain event to refill the tanks.
Besides irrigation, what are some other things that rainwater is used for around the
Yeah.
house or property?
Yeah, around here, our specialty is truly using rainwater for the entire household water supply. And again, this is for cases where municipal water just isn't available. So we're using that water for the entire house. So we're flushing toilets, we're doing laundry, we're taking showers, we're cooking with the water, we're drinking the water, we're irrigating with the water. Everything in the house is supplied with rainwater.
So what sort of filtration is required to bring it in the house?
So there, if you are setting up a rainwater harvesting system for your household water supply, you want to get a higher quality pre-filter for your system. We're going to use a 3 to 4 stage filtration system, which is going to include at least 2 stages of sediment reduction. We want to get that water down to a 5 micron level. And at that level, 5 micron is finer than the diameter of a strand of hair. I mean, we're talking very refined filtration. And then we're going to send it to a carbon filter, which is going to help neutralize taste and odor in the water. And then occasionally we'll incorporate what's called a tannin removal filter. If you have any discoloration of the water, it's going to help clarify that. And our last stage is going to be a UV, ultraviolet sterilization system. And as soon as bacteria comes in contact with ultraviolet light, it's instantly sterilized, so it can't reproduce. And of course, bacteria is only harmful if it can reproduce and grow in your system. So ultraviolet light is an incredible water filtration. And at that point, will get you to the point of drinkability of your water supply.
Fascinating. So great. So we can use rainwater for irrigation. If you take it further, showering and doing dishes and washing ourselves, washing hands, brushing teeth, it's drinking water. Do we need to do anything more on an RO level, reverse osmosis for drinking, or is it typically fine just to drink that water that comes right out of the tap at that point?
For the most part, one of the things I love about rainwater is that it's pretty darn predictable. I mean, we can design a filtration system that works in Uganda just as well as it works in Ohio. But there is some variation on water quality. If you have a lot of trees around your house or your business, your commercial property, you're going to have a lot more organic material in the air. You're going to have a lot more pollens. You're going to have just things to consider that could impact your water quality. So you may want to take it a step further and incorporate a reverse osmosis filtration system. But you only want to do that at the point of use. So typically that's going to be a single drinking water spout for your kitchen sink. And the reason for that is that reverse osmosis is very effective. It strips out everything other than 2 parts hydrogen and 1 part oxygen, but it comes at a cost. Because the filtration membrane is so fine, your pressure is non-existent. It just trickles through the filter. You store a small pressure tank under your sink to build up a reserve of the filtered water. And also, reverse osmosis wastes a lot of water. So for every gallon of filtered water you get from an RO system, you're going to lose between 5 and 9 gallons of wastewater. And when you're on a finite system like a rainwater harvesting cistern, 5 to 9 gallons per 1 gallon filtered water is a huge consideration. And you just want to be thoughtful about it and just use it where it's necessary. But for 99% of the customers, RO systems are not necessary.
Some of the other things that we like to use rainwater for include topping up the pool, topping up the hot tub, not filling it, but topping it up.
Yes.
It's a great thing to do if you have to wash your car. The on-demand pump is exactly that. You could have a spigot connecting a hose that connects to your line from your tank, and you can set those up everywhere. And as soon as you squeeze the hose, or you can have an automatic fill on your pool, it's going to provide water because it's an on-demand pump just waiting for a command for water.
You're exactly right. Yes. There are a couple different types of pumps, and you're right. There are automatic pumps that have internal pressure and flow switches that read the water pressure in the line and send water pressure directly to your point of use. So you can go straight from your cistern to a hose, to a hydrant, to a top off valve. And then there's the pumps that charge that pressure tank before you use the water. So there's a couple ways of approaching that. But yeah, exactly right. We can mimic household water pressure, municipal water pressure through a pumping system very easily. And pretty soon you won't be able to tell the difference
Yeah.
between.
And if filtered, I forgot to mention, we have an outdoor shower that's supplied from our rainwater tank. We have a
That's
propane
awesome.
tank and an on-demand heater, and we take outdoor showers. We even gray water that water that we use to our garden below ground. And so everything goes to use.
That's awesome. That's
Yeah.
awesome. And of
So
course, the
let's
naturally soft water from the rain is perfect for showering. And
It feels so good. We feel a difference because there are no chemicals, no plastics,
yes,
nothing that we have to worry about. And
yes,
it does feel very silky. Um,
absolutely.
so we've talked a lot about plastic tanks. We've talked about
Mhm.
above ground tanks, below ground plastic cisterns. Obviously, there are other materials, whether it's concrete or metal,
Mhm.
that also exists. When is it appropriate to use those? How does pricing differ, and what factors should people consider when selecting the right materials?
Yeah, that's a great question. For people around here in the Ohio region, so we actually make our own line of precast concrete cisterns that dollar per gallon are far cheaper than high density polyethylene plastic tanks. Um, the limit there is that we can only ship them so far. They take a crane to set the tanks, and while we can send it on a flatbed semi east of the Mississippi River, we still have to consider having a crane on site to offload and set the tanks. So there are definitely considerations there. So while the initial cost may be less, the installed cost maybe more, especially if you're outside of 300 miles from us. But inside of 300 miles, concrete is the way to go for our customers here. We can scale up very large systems. We've done plenty of commercial 25,000 gallon underground concrete systems that
Hmm.
are pretty affordable, honestly. So concrete is an option. You may have a precast concrete company close to you that you could consider. Typically, though, any tank that they would have would be geared more towards septic systems, and they may not make them to the same standards. Like our tanks are NSF certified for drinking water. They're cast using food grade sealants, and they're thicker walled than a septic tank would be, steel reinforced, things like that. So you definitely want to probe precast company a little bit to make sure they understand that you want drinking water quality coming out of your rain cistern. In terms of metal tanks, now if you're in the Texas area, metal is going to be pretty affordable. You can really scale up metal tanks very easily, especially the corrugated steel where they're panelized, and you can extend the capacity of your rain catchment system with a tank like that, anywhere from 1,000 gallon to 1 million gallon. And those are going to be above ground tanks, of course. So you want to be in a climate that is more suited to staying above freezing the year round, where, for us, it's going to be underground cisterns strictly.
Yeah, so let's talk about that. Are there any concerns around freezing weather with rainwater harvesting systems?
If you do get freezing weather, I will say it is a nuisance to have an above ground tank unless it's hooked up to an irrigation system, which is going to be winterized already. You're going to shut down your irrigation system a certain point of the year. Then you winterize your tank. It's no big deal. So the solution to a worry-free system is really to bury the tank. And burying it also has the advantage of keeping the water removed from sunlight. Sunlight, of course, is going to build algae and grow bacteria. So the more you can remove it from sunlight, you're going to eliminate an algae concern. You're going to reduce a bacteria concern. So it really does make a lot of sense to try to bury the tank if you can afford it.
Sure. And what about the conveyance pipes? I mean, out here
Mm-hmm.
in California, we only have to bury them 6 inches below the surface, but we don't really get freezing weather. How about in colder weather climates?
Honestly, you don't have to go below frost line for that. As long as that pipe is sloped downhill towards the cistern, it's never going to have standing water in that pipe to freeze. And then the water line supplying your house or whatever your end use is, that's the only thing in the system that really needs to be below frost level to prevent from freezing.
That makes a lot of sense. Let's talk a little bit about aesthetics and public
Yes.
perception. So,
Sure.
what would you say to people who think, oh, rainwater tanks, they're unsightly. I can't envision having to look outside and see a tank on my property. What's your response to that?
With a little creative design and engineering, you can really make a system very affordable and easily concealed or easily enmeshed in your landscape in a way that is not offensive to the eye. We've used plastic tanks for commercial installations. They say, I don't want to see this tank. Okay, no problem. We talked about it earlier. You can do a wet line system where all the drainage piping is concealed underground, and it only comes back up to the surface when it goes into the tank. And you can put that tank downhill and hide it behind shrubs. You can make a very hideable system. And of course, if you have a higher budget, you may consider incorporating a corrugated steel tank that are going to have that higher aesthetic quality, but it's going to come at a cost. Generally 3 to 10 times more than a plastic
I
system.
usually show my clients the price for a corrugated steel tank, and then they say, well, maybe a tank's not so bad, plastic tank.
Right, that's
Some of the
right.
things that we do, like you said, you could plant plants or trees or shrubs around it. Sometimes they'll wrap it with just metal wire and they'll train vines, and the whole thing becomes
Absolutely.
beautifully wrapped. In some cases, hey, we're California, people come and actually do murals and designs on them. They become
Oh, that's
a
awesome.
great palette, yeah, for creativity. It's really fun. And then I think a lot of times what I talk about is if you're building a new house and you're gonna be bringing in big machinery to excavate for your foundation, for example, well, you might think about just digging a hole and putting a below ground cistern in because, yeah, it's going to cost you a little more, but you'll never know it's there. It's just going to be somewhere around this big manhole, and you can cover that with a fake rock or something as long as there's access. But sometimes there's a great payoff to just hiding it completely if you have that luxury and accessibility to bring in the machinery to put in that below ground cistern.
Exactly right. Yes, absolutely.
So that's great. Let's get into the cost, the return on investment, and the economic considerations of rainwater harvesting. So I guess first, like, what's a typical cost per gallon that someone should consider or use to estimate the cost of a rainwater harvesting system?
Yeah, that can range quite a bit, of course. If you're doing an above ground system, you could easily do an above ground 5,000 gallon catchment system for, gosh, $1.50 a gallon, maybe even less than that. And of course, smaller systems, there's plenty of rain barrels that you could put in for $100 that have a return on investment. I don't know what your water prices are like out in California, but the municipal water price around here is very expensive in suburban areas. That we see return on investment on those small scale rain barrels in a year. I mean, it's incredible how quickly they pay for themselves. So yeah, definitely there is a range for let's say a 5,500 gallon underground complete cistern system for whole house use, drinking water, everything. Here in Ohio, if we're running the downspout drainage, we're running everything underground. We're putting in pre-filter, the concrete cistern, the pumps, the pump controls, the filters, the pre-filter, the overflow piping, the overflow guards, things like that. You're looking at 22 to 24,000 at this point.
So it's about $4, $4.50 a gallon, something like that.
Yes, but again, that's an underground system, and that is whole house supply. So we're pulling permits. It's drinking water quality by the time it's all finished. As I mentioned, the corrugated steel tanks can be pricey per gallon. You're probably looking at $7, $8 a gallon, maybe even more. But yeah, if you're looking for an aesthetically pleasing system, then that's definitely the way to go.
And is there a typical life cycle of these tanks in terms of years, how long they'll last?
Yes. So the only thing that's going to degrade the high density polyethylene tanks, which is going to be your plastic tanks, is installation error for underground tanks. Or UV exposure. Now, the plastic tanks do have, especially above ground plastic tanks, do have UV inhibitors molded into the plastic. So there is an extension there. And on an above ground plastic tank, you're going to get, 60 years, 80 years before it starts to degrade outside. Underground tank, that's a lifetime tank. It's going to last several generations.
So bottom line, these tanks are probably going to outlive us.
Yes, exactly. Yes.
Okay.
Exactly right. Yeah. And same with concrete. And concrete is advantageous because it can be repaired very easily. We repair concrete cisterns all the time. Old cisterns, 80, 90, 100-year-old cisterns that didn't have the same standards that we do today. They need repair. We go in and waterproof them all the time. But again, a good precast concrete tank like the ones that we make, it's going to be a lifetime tank. It's made to last.
Wow. So what's the typical ROI, return on investment period, on a rainwater harvesting system?
It's rare that it's under 5 years, especially for sizable above ground system. 5 years is going to be the point of return. And it can go up to 10 years, depending on how the water is used and what it's supplementing.
Out here, we do have some financial incentives, rebates, and even some grants available to offset costs. Are you seeing those out your way? And are you seeing those as you look across the United States or elsewhere, that they're catching on, or is it still a challenge to get those incentives?
Yes. So what we see a lot around here are the soil and water conservation districts. They will offer reduced pricing or rebates for small scale rainwater catchment. Those are going to be the backyard 50-gallon rain barrels, something like that. You can absolutely usually find reduced costs there. In terms of anything larger, water is fairly abundant for us, thankfully, out here in Ohio, in the Great Lakes region. But if you're inside a municipality, if you have a sewer bill, chances are very good that in order to meet EPA standards, they will have started charging for per square foot of impervious surface for your house or your business. So that would include your roof and any hardscaping or driveway surface. The way to get that credited back is typically through a catchment system, a rainwater harvesting system, or a rain garden. So typically, if you do notice a sewer charge for stormwater runoff, call your water department and see if they offer credits for that, because typically they will for harvesting half your roof into a catchment system. And that will pay for itself. That will make the ROI much, much quicker.
I'm going to make you jealous. Out where we are in Northern California, my municipality, for rainwater harvesting systems, they offer a rebate of 75 cents per gallon up to $2,000.
Holy cow, that's amazing.
And it gets better. They're trying to get rid of grass, of turf, because it uses more water.
Yeah.
So you can get $2 per square foot of grass if you replace it with drought-tolerant plants and do some sheet mulching. But if you put in a rain garden, which is what you just mentioned, which temporarily slows, spreads, and sinks that stormwater before it runs off the property, you can get over $4 per square foot rebate.
Wow.
Yeah. So
now that's how to do it. And honestly, most municipalities end up saving money in the long run because they don't have to update the stormwater sewer system. I can't tell you how many times we've dispelled the myth that rainwater harvesting is illegal. Not only is it legal most everywhere in the United States, but municipalities actively encourage it because it is such a great boon to the local government to really help manage that stormwater.
Yeah, but it's true. It was not legal, even in the state of California, until just a number of years ago, which is
Yes, you're
hard
right.
to believe.
Yes, you're right.
And
You're right. Yes.
I come from Portland, Oregon, where for every CCF of water that you use, you're billed 3 CCFs for stormwater runoff because it rains so
Wow.
much. Their
Oh my
systems are
gosh.
so overwhelmed that they
Oh,
have to expand their wastewater treatment facilities, and you have to pay for that. So
oh my.
you mentioned the sewer line. Any opportunity to reduce that flow in places that are overwhelmed, that's helping your central processing or treatment centers for sure. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So, Jonathan, when does a rainwater harvesting system make sense and when doesn't it?
It makes sense if customers are limited in their water options, if their well is going dry or they have a low producing well, or they really are struggling figuring out how to get a consistent water supply for their house. On a residential scale, if you do have municipal water, a great starting point is if you have a green thumb and you love going out to your garden, landscape or vegetable garden, and tending to it and just being out there, man, is rainwater harvesting a perfect solution. Not only will you notice a difference in watering with rainwater that doesn't have chlorine in it, that is naturally more acidic, plants just respond to it better. But it's honestly just very enjoyable to just drop from a tank or a barrel with your watering can and just connect a little bit more to the water supply. It's
It's
a
kind of
perfect starting
addictive,
point.
isn't it?
It is.
I have clients who call me and they're just like so happy. They just want to tell me,
Mm.
my tank, it's at 50%.
Yeah,
My tank
right.
is it's at 100. They're
Yeah.
just so excited every time it rains now.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And because for them, it's like it's free water.
Yes, exactly.
It's gold.
Exactly. Yes, right. Absolutely. And it's
Liquid
so
gold.
fun. It's like you said, it's just addicting. It's fun. And starting off with a very basic system. As you grow into the system, you'll soon say, oh, I can water half your garden with rainwater and half with city water and see what the difference is in production and vitality of the plants.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's how I got started. We
Mm.
started simply by putting in a gray water system, and we found we saved some, and then we put in rainwater harvesting, we saved a lot more, and then we
Mm.
put in water efficiency devices to measure how much water we're using and irrigation control, so we're more efficiently irrigating. Before we knew it, we were saving 60 to 70% reduction on our municipal water, and it was
Holy
just
cow.
yeah.
Wow.
I mean, it becomes like an
Wow.
addiction where you're like, what else can we cut?
Yeah.
But we're not cutting because we're still living the same lifestyle. We still do all the stuff we love to do with water. We
Mm.
have our hot tub and our shower and everything we want, but we're not paying the high bills to do it. How effective is rainwater harvesting compared to other methods such as gray water recycling or permaculture techniques or water efficiency devices inside or outside the home?
Yeah, absolutely. Honestly, rainwater harvesting, I think, and of course I'm biased, but I have pretty good evidence to back it up. It's a very user-friendly system. And of course, I don't have the expertise that you have, Paul, on gray water systems, but I do know that separating your gray water from black water in the house is an involved process and can be more technical. Whereas with a rain harvesting system, you can have very little technical experience. We have any number of elderly customers who barely can hold up a drill, but yet are able to install a system very easily, or find a local handyman to install a system easily. So rainwater harvesting is very easy to implement, especially in the stripped down diverter and tank version of the system. So in that way, it's a great way to implement water conservation at your home.
Yeah, no, it's interesting. I think if you can get the right amount of roof area collected and you have enough storage, my experience is that rainwater harvesting is certainly as competitive as gray water recycling, for example. The benefit of gray water recycling, obviously, is we get water every day throughout the year. We don't get that necessarily with rainwater harvesting, though if you
Mm.
have the right amount of storage and also depending on where you live, you'll have multiple fills possibly throughout the year and you'll have enough water to get you through the year. added another tank to my system to really get me through the year with my tanks. And I almost doubled my system size so that I absolutely have not only enough water for myself, but I actually give it to my neighbor
Wow,
for
that's awesome.
landscaping. Yeah, which I think is really a cool thing for us to think about as sharing water in the drought with climate crisis at hand. So
Mhm.
it is something I think that you just have to plan carefully and do an ROI analysis, and hopefully you can make it make sense. So let's talk about if there are any trends that you're seeing in different regions or in states around the country regarding rainwater harvesting adoption.
Yeah, certainly, as we've touched on, there is an uptick in municipalities really trying to get customers to adopt rainwater harvesting or at least a different stormwater management plan for their households or businesses. So that trend has really picked up. I think it started probably 8, 10 years ago when the EPA was really rolling out those regulations on different stormwater management practices. And that's when we started seeing that uptick. In terms of innovation of technology, it's both surprising at how little innovation there is worldwide, but also equally how incredible it is when there is innovation and it's really, wow, what a great idea. The US has been slower than, let's say, the European market in adopting rainwater harvesting as part of a new build. In parts of Europe, or Germany in particular, they're required to incorporate rainwater harvesting for flushing toilets, and
Hmm.
so they have cisterns incorporated in a new build, even if they have a municipal water line. Here, we don't have that, so of course, their technology is more advanced, I would say, than ours.
For sure. I've seen some of the innovations coming from folks who have been through extended
Mm,
drought periods like Australia and Israel, producing some really
mm,
cool stuff that I wish we had
mm.
that really would be game changers here, but hopefully in the years to come.
Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely.
And you mentioned going back just here in the United States, are you seeing an uptick in adoption in certain states or regions of the United States more than others?
Certainly, yeah, certainly more than others. We do see an uptick, absolutely, in regions that are becoming more arid or where the groundwater supplies are deteriorating or depleting, rather. And yeah, and sometimes it's frankly a little scary. I've certainly lost sleep any number of nights. People's wells go dry and they don't know what to do. They're really stuck. You can try to sink money into drilling a new well, which is always a gamble. We have any number of customers who drill 3 wells before they think of rainwater harvesting. And by that time, they're already out $60,000.
Yeah.
We do see upticks in that regard on water shortages and looking for ways to survive, make their properties manageable or usable. So yeah, and of course here in Ohio, we had the worst drought in 50 some years this last year, and it was devastating. A lot of wells went dry.
Yeah.
Um, yeah.
That seems to be the recurring story. I do a lot of design work for Sonoma County, just north of me, which is wine country. And they've been
Mm.
tapping those wells for years for production water to irrigate for wine. As a result, a lot of residential wells have gone dry, or they just run to such a low level that there's just too much contaminant in the water for them to be able to pump
Yeah.
it out and use it. We put in a
Mm.
system that you helped me with. You actually helped me design it and you shipped the stuff out to us that we used. It was a woman whose well was contaminated. We put in the
Mm.
rainwater harvesting tanks. Her kids, she has 3 of them. They'd never taken a bath more than 6 inches deep. And they finally, with
My
whole house
gosh.
filtration, got to enjoy a full bath, which
Oh
was,
my
can you
gosh.
imagine?
Wow.
Yeah. Uh,
Yeah.
but this is what's happening. And up there are tremendous programs that make it possible. There's an organization that are getting fantastic rebates where in some cases they're giving $5,000 rebate on rainwater harvesting tanks. Or on
Wow.
top of that, if you live near where salmon are spawning, they'll give you 2 free 5,000-gallon tanks on top of that, plus my consulting fee included in all of this. So,
Wow.
yeah,
That's a no-brainer.
it's a
Jeez.
no-brainer. It's free. Just do it. So I love to
My
see that.
goodness.
Another new normal is thinking about defending ourselves from wildfires. So,
Yeah,
mhm.
absolutely.
Yeah,
Oh my
yeah.
gosh. Gosh, if that's not a testament to the reason for having a rainwater harvesting tank, oh my gosh.
So many
Wow.
uses that you can think of. You can get really creative with this. And of course, it's just regulated by what the health department will let you do with it. You
Yes.
always want to check with that. I do also recommend if you are doing in whole home water filtration and using it for drinking, and you want to get that water tested before
Yes.
you start
Yes.
in. There might be some things in there, as you mentioned, there might be too much tannin or things you need to get out of the water before you use it because you want it to help you and not do damage to your system
Absolutely.
or your pipes. Yeah.
Yes.
So, how does rainwater harvesting compare to municipal water systems in terms of sustainability and resilience to droughts and other things like that?
Yeah, that's a good question. So when we're setting up a rainwater harvesting system, I like to think of it as creating a small scale water treatment plant at a home that we're installing for it.
So, like a
And
decentralized water
e-
treatment system?
exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. And the benefit of that is you can treat to your standards for the most part, unless you're regulated to, then there's certain minimum standards, but beyond that, you can treat to your standards. And also you can choose which points of use are treated to which standard. We're setting up a cistern for someone. They're pumping it into their house. How about having direct feeds to your toilets before the water's treated through the sediment filters and UV? Or same with cold water on your washing machine or your outdoor frost-free silcox or outdoor faucets. No need to treat those necessarily. So yeah, you're in that way to be able to pick and choose what we're treating is
Hmm.
inevitably more efficient than treating on a municipal scale everything.
Sure.
No reason to have drinking water go into our toilets to just flush them away. And
That's right.
yeah, so in that regard, we're creating efficiency.
So, what are some of the challenges people might face when installing a rainwater harvesting system? Are there any regulatory or permitting hurdles that they're going to have to get through?
Yeah, yeah. So there can be any number of challenges. If you have municipal water and you're looking to bring rainwater into your house, that is the most difficult hurdle to get over. And honestly, gosh, unless you know the head of the water department, I would honestly not advise going down that road because it's painful. It will be expensive. And in some cases, it is necessary to go down that road if you're in a drought stricken environment and you need to reduce your water footprint. You're probably going to have a water department that's more receptive. But around here, going down that road, bringing rainwater into a house that already is supplied by municipal water is very difficult to do, and rarely does it get done.
If you're in Flint, Michigan, might be an easy argument.
That's
Uh,
true.
so I think
You,
that is possibly the one way out, but you got to prove it first.
yes, and you have to be in a lot of ways on the front lines of that because there's not going to be anyone preceding you probably to help to have
You
paved
could
the
be a
way for you.
leader.
That's right. That's right. That's right. So yes, it is difficult, and though not impossible, and I certainly don't mean to sound so discouraging, but as corny as it sounds, I try to learn from water, and water takes the path of least resistance. And if we're taking a path of least resistance in design, we're going to go towards outdoor use. A lot of people have landscapes that need watering or cars that need washing or things like that.
So, do I need a permit to install a below ground cistern? Do I need one to install an above ground tank?
Yes. I've found that if you're in a suburban neighborhood, you're probably going to need permitting for most rainwater catchment systems. If you're in a rural area, you're probably not going to need any type of permitting unless it's being used for your household water supply, in which case, as you mentioned, Paul, checking with your county health district to make sure they don't have any restrictions or any regulations, checking with the Department of Natural Resources will regulate wells, and they may have some say in cisterns. Rural areas, of course, tend to be more lax in terms of regulations and permitting. Urban areas are hit or miss. We have a lot of urban areas where bigger cities are just more receptive, and they're not going to require a permit, typically, that I've seen for above ground systems, but they probably will for an underground system unless it's dedicated to a hydrant or something like that. And it's clearly labeled on the hydrant, rainwater reuse, not for drinking.
Yeah, that's helpful. What I found is know your code or find someone who knows your code. We have in our area what's called California Plumbing Code, and there's a whole section for rainwater harvesting. And
Wow.
as long as we stick with those guidelines, we never have an issue with the
Wow.
installations. And then, of course, yes, sometimes it's new for the permitting office, and we do have to actually show them those codes so that they can understand that they are actually already approved and we're not just making the stuff up, or it's not a brand new innovation that's never been done before. Rainwater harvesting has been done before, and
Yes.
hopefully it's in an area where code has been created. You simply have to meet those codes. And that's what we do is we design to the code and we document that. If somebody has to get a permit, we include all those codes. We call those out so they can literally just walk that permit in with the drawing, and it makes a lot of sense to whoever is issuing the permit.
Mm.
Uh, so what are some options that exist for people who have very little land around their house for a rainwater harvesting system? Maybe they're tied up to their neighbor, they don't have a lot of land to have a tank.
Yeah, sure. So there are companies that market like tanks for crawl spaces, specifically bladder tanks.
Mhm.
I do have experience installing bladder tanks many years ago. Personally, I would never recommend them. I think they're dangerous and needed servicing all the time. It's
And
just unpredictable.
rats
Oh
love them.
gosh. Oh yeah.
Rats,
It's just
you
yeah,
got to fence
right.
them.
Good point. Yes. I just highly recommend staying away from it. Typically, we also advise not bringing rainwater into a house for a basement tank, just because, my gosh, what if the drain broke in some way? You're bringing a lot of rainwater into your house all of a sudden.
Could it go in a garage?
Yeah, garage. Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Something that's built on slab that has a floor drain. Those would be considerations that we'd want to make. Ideally, in a temperature controlled environment, if you have frost issues, absolutely, garage or a barn is a great thing to do. The other thing, more aesthetically pleasing plastic tanks, and specifically ones that are specifically designed for rainwater harvesting, they're slimline variety, and they're meant to fit in very tight spaces. So yeah, that's
So
great.
they're about 2 feet in depth, correct?
Exactly right.
So I think the thing there is just to know if there are any setback requirements. That's what people want to check with their local office. Typically, out here, your tank can't be within 5 feet of your property line. On a flat surface, it can go up to 10 feet on an incline of 15% or more. So it's something you want to check
Mm,
out, but it is certainly a solution that we've installed that works. It's more costly because of the way they're manufactured, but it is a way
yes,
to get it done. And
yes.
great. So, Jonathan, what are the most common mistakes people make when they're
Oof.
setting up a rainwater harvesting system?
Oh
That's a whole
gosh.
other podcast, I know, but
Yeah.
let's do the top
Well,
50.
yeah, yeah. I think that the most common mistake I see is that people don't have good enough pre-filtration. Pre-filters matter a lot, and maybe more than inside filters, although not for bacteria. But a good pre-filter is worth its weight in gold, and a bad one or a non-existent pre-filter will just make rainwater harvesting miserable.
On that note, just one thing we didn't talk about, but gutter guards up on your gutter can also help with that pre-filtration before it
Absolutely.
gets, so you get a
Yeah.
pre-filtration.
Yes, great point. Yeah, absolutely. Really anything to try to reduce sedimentation is great. So that's the number one mistake I see is pre-filtration. And then not taking coliform bacteria seriously is another one. Now, I've never personally seen or heard of anyone getting sick from their rain cistern, even if they don't have filtration. But a coliform count is going to be in your cistern if you're not occasionally adding slow dissolved chlorine pellets or using an ozone generator. those are things that you don't have to do, but if you want to keep that water fresh in your cistern, it is good to take coliform seriously and try to reduce that bacteria. And then
Let me ask you a question
please.
on that. That's interesting because people have asked me, what's the life of your water? If you capture rainwater right now, how long
Yes.
can you hold it for before you shouldn't use it anymore, as long as you've pre-filtered it?
This is not a brag by any means, but I've been in a unique position where I've been inside over 3,000 cisterns in my 19 years. And I've had the benefit of seeing cisterns that have not been touched since 1920. And I don't know of any other industry where I could see a water supply that's just been sitting there for 100 years that hasn't no one's seen or no one's touched. So I know from experience that honestly, in an underground cistern, there's no expiration date on the water if it's treated properly inside. It's no better or worse than water that's been in a cistern for a day. Yeah, removing it from sunlight really does wonders to the tank. Now, of course, it is going to have a higher coliform count, and it would need to be shocked with chlorine or something like that. But really, there's no expiration on it.
So if someone has even above ground tanks and they're using that water inside of that season that they collected it, they get it in the winter, they use it for irrigation and topping their pool and hot tub and whatever else they do with it, or maybe inside their house. As long as they use it up within that year, is it generally going to be fine?
Yes, absolutely. Generally, of course, they'll want an opaque tank, one that is as dark as possible to reduce sunlight from penetrating.
The green or the black tanks are better than the tan or the
yes. Or this is, I'm
light
sorry,
color.
this is the mistake that I see a lot, and that is people using those darn 275-gallon palletized totes for rainwater harvesting, the ones that they can get for $50. It's great. If that's your budget, absolutely. I'm not trying to take away from that, but my gosh, they will breed algae very quickly. They need to be sheltered. They need to be a tarp or something put over them. And if they do get algae, oh Lord, it is very difficult to clean those out because they have a 2 or 3 inch opening on top that you can't get anything in there to clean it out. And it's useless at that point. But yes, you're right. If they use water within a season, there's very little concern other than algae growing. And if you can keep it in the shade or keep the plastic dark so that sunlight doesn't get in, then that will help that situation.
Great. Let's end with the future. The future of rainwater harvesting. How do you see the role of rainwater harvesting if you were to look ahead? How do you see it evolving over, let's say, the next decade or two?
Personally, 19 years as a business owner is very difficult. And the only thing that keeps me going is that I really do think that this is maybe not the solution, but a prominent solution in the coming years. If I can help people have a secure water supply for their home or their business, then mission accomplished, because wars are fought over water. And the work is to prevent wars, prevent conflict, but just also make us all more resilient. And that's honestly what keeps me going, what keeps me getting down into a cistern and shoveling out muck. Is today's work. I'm just helping one other person have a secure water supply. And I think that is the future for us.
That's great. That's great. We can move it from deficit to resilience, maybe even abundance in some cases.
Yes. Absolutely.
Imagine that.
Yeah, that's right.
What do you think needs to change at the policy level to encourage wider adoption of rainwater harvesting?
I think if you are a regulator, it would help to listen to people who do the installation to see what works and what doesn't, because I've come up against a lot of obstacles with our own Ohio Health Department at the state level. Just this regulation does not work. This regulation is 40 years old, and this is actually detrimental to people's water supply. And there are some regulations that I've worked on for over a decade trying to get them changed and just bumped up against whatever red tape or bureaucracy that there is. So I think if regulators can have a little bit of intention on connecting with installers to find out good practices. We all want our installs to be safe. We all want them to be high quality. We're all in this together, and I think that would be the main advice I would have for regulators. But I think policy-wise, I think rainwater harvesting is moving in the right directions. We have a lot of great advocates through the American Rainwater Catchment Systems Association. That's a conglomerate of installers and suppliers. They do a lot of great work in helping to write updated plumbing code. And so, yeah, I think we're all headed in the right direction. And yeah, let's keep going.
Yeah, for sure. And also next on that is incentives. Where do those need to go? Where I live,
Yes.
when I first started doing this, there wasn't much incentive, and we had to speak
Mm.
with our municipalities and talk to them about why it was important to create incentives for these things. And it's a hard balance because they want to make money selling water. And
Yes.
they used to only be interested in us when they didn't have enough water to supply. Okay, well, now your solutions make sense. Let's catch that. And you can help to augment our clients' needs. But now there seems to be a nice balance struck where they realize we can all coexist to ensure that there's always enough water, which I think is in everyone's best interest. But it sounds like in your area, for example, more needs to be done on incentives to get it to 75 cents per gallon or up to $2,000 rebate for a system, for example, in rainwater harvesting, or maybe larger.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. The government incentives really do work. If they offer rebates, people take advantage of them for sure. And it does wonders to expand the effectiveness of the programming.
For sure. Jonathan, it's been a pleasure speaking with you today.
Thank you,
Uh,
Paul. Pleasure's
clear,
mine.
Clearly, you are so much about rainwater harvesting, but in my personal time working with you, as you've been providing us with products, you've been incredible in providing education and great service and just a real consummate professional.
Thank you so
So
much.
grateful that you're in this industry. So you can check them out more at rainbrothers.com.
That's right.
Uh, I want to thank everyone for listening today. Hopefully, you were educated, inspired, and moved to maybe do something in rainwater harvesting. You can learn more about us at waterchampions.com if you want to learn about how to get out and design or install or sell these solutions. Check out renovaacademy.com. And I am Paul Mann, your host, wishing you all the best. Let's get out there. Let's make water go farther. Be well. Hey, thanks for watching. Our water future depends on action, and we all need to be water champions. Visit waterchampions.com to explore cutting-edge water reuse and efficiency solutions for your home or business. Learn how you can implement these solutions through online courses available at renovaacademy.com. And please drop your comments below, like, share, and subscribe to help spread the word. Thank you.